A big, tough samurai once went to see a little monk. "Monk," he barked in a voice accustomed to instant obedience, "teach me about heaven and hell." The monk looked up at the warrior and replied with utter disdain, "Teach you about heaven and hell? I couldn't teach you anything. You're dumb, you're dirty, you're a disgrace and an embarrassment to the samurai class. Get out of my sight, I can't stand you." The samurai got furious. He shook, and red in the face, he was speechless with rage. He pulled out his sword, prepared to slay the monk. Looking straight into the samurai's eyes, the monk said softly, "That's hell." The samurai froze, realizing the compassion of the monk who had risked his life to show him hell. He put down his sword, fell to his knees, filled with gratitude, and the monk said softly, "And that's heaven." The Buddha taught that with your thoughts, you create your world. And we indeed have the capacity to create hell for ourselves as well as heaven. I'm just back from the week-long retreat. We had 97 participants for the week, and we were joined by Anam Tubten, who's a Tibetan teacher who led the class 2 years ago, I think, here. And it was quite powerful to sort of blend sort of the Theravadan approach, sort of the classical orthodox with the sort of the Tibetan practice, which is just kind of wild, has kind of an animistic quality to it, as the Tibetan culture does. And during the course of a week, in my role as one of the leaders, I give a talk, I lead some mindful movement, and we also have individual interviews and groups throughout the course of the week. And it's quite powerful just to sense the arc of the experience when you dramatically slow down and pay attention. So I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about different forms of seeing. The first is about what it means to see clearly, which is the definition of vipassana, this form of meditation, learning how to see clearly. I'd like to talk a little bit about seeing what gets in the way of being free. Because as you begin to see more clearly, you also see your patterns. You see the ways that you construct your own heaven and hell. The third thing is about seeing transformation. How does transformation work? How do you work with physical pain, emotional turbulence, mental agitation, and shift your relationship to it? And the third is about seeing the good, how we can actually train ourselves to see the good and the impact that can have. Not in a premature transcendence way, but a way that really guides our attention toward seeing possibility. There's someone who I spent some time with on retreat who was going through his own personal hell. He had left his family when he was quite young, and his oldest was 3 years old. And over the course of the week, he was just racked with guilt and remorse. And he had since worked very hard to rebuild his relationship with his children, and was very devoted to them and spent time with them. But they let him know how hard it was when he left. During the arc of his week of really being with this experience, he experienced, as you can imagine, all kinds of waves. And in one of our interviews, he recognized that if he hadn't left, he would have died. And as he sort of sat with that, there was sort of a recognition that he had done the best that he could. And there was also a very empathic understanding of the consequences of that. So I had asked him, I said, how many feelings, how many emotions did you experience during the week in relationship to that? And he went on to sort of name, the sadness, the remorse, the guilt, the anger, the judgment, on and on, all these different distinctions of emotions. And I find that quite interesting, because I have certainly found for myself that when I'm feeling a strong emotion, it's never just one emotion. It's usually a collection of different emotions at the same time. If you think about your experience today, what would you say your prominent emotion was? Was there a dominant emotion you had this day, or something that occurred that created some form of a feeling in your body with some label from the mind? As I've had this talk in my mind, I've sort of been noticing the actual feelings that we experience. I actually stopped at Chipotle on my way here, and the poor woman who was rolling the burritos was having a really hard time. And the line was backing up, and she was just messing up this burrito like you cannot imagine. And she had to get another one and dump it in there and roll it, and so I was sort of trying to imagine, what is she feeling? I imagined that she was feeling, really self-conscious, feeling really embarrassed, and then I thought, well, I wonder what everyone else is feeling. Is like. And it looked like the one guy was like a little bit irritated. Someone else looked really sympathetic. The cashier just looked like he had checked out. He just didn't want to deal with anything. But what was so cool was, at some point, she got the burrito, and someone said, "That was a really big burrito." And someone else said, "You did great." And suddenly, and then she presented it with this huge smile on her face, like she just really accomplished something. And there was this sort of a celebration feeling in Chipotle. But it's quite amazing to really see just how much we feel and react during the day. We're always feeling something. Someone walks in the room, you have some feeling, you have some kind of a reaction to it. So when we see clearly, an interesting analogy which you may have heard is, if you take a glass of muddy water and you set it on a countertop, the silt in the water will begin to settle. And as it settles, the water becomes clear. And so it is with meditation. Any time that you pause and you train your attention to come back to the here and now and to relax, you begin to experience, and you may have touched into it in that meditation, there's an anchor to here and now. We use the body as the anchor. And the more you come back and rest, the more you reinforce the sense of who you are as the non-judging observer of everything going on in your life. Then, of course, the more you sort of take that stance of non-judging self-observation, the more you begin to see what's really going on under your story. The more empathy you have, the more you can sense what other people's experience is as well. All coming from this practice of pausing and resting in the here and now. I gave a talk during the retreat. It was all part of seeing clearly on the 3 characteristics of reality. when you really examine your moment-to-moment experience of this life, you will probably begin to notice what's called anicca, impermanence. You'll begin to notice everything that is changing. Everything that is changing. Anything that is born out of causes and conditions is subject to change. That includes your body, it includes sensations, it includes your thoughts, it includes your perception, it includes your consciousness. It's all changing. The second characteristic of reality is called dukkha, which is translated as instability, unsettledness, stress, or suffering. And it all occurs in relationship to what's changing. If you resist what's changing, unsatisfactoriness, unsteadiness of the mind. If you try to change something, if you try and make something change and it doesn't, the same thing happens. And as you continue to settle the mind, as you continue to practice self-observation, there is a deeper recognition of what's called anatta, the third characteristic of reality, which is translated as not self. And that as you begin to see that anything about you that is born out of causes and conditions is also subject to change. Your body is going to change and fall away. Your beliefs are subject to change. Your perception is subject to change. Your consciousness is subject to change. And it can very much open our consciousness when we come into this recognition of what is changing, how you're holding your relationship to what is changing, and to really inquire, who are you really in the midst of everything that is changing? So part of this is about emotion. One of the streams in your experience is emotion. And what exactly is an emotion? One definition that I like is that an emotion is a psychobiological event. It occurs in your mind, but primarily it occurs in your body. And the emotion actually arises out of the realm of sensation. So by bringing our attention to the direct energetic experience of an emotion, we can touch into it. I had heard somewhere, someone computed that the arc of an emotion is about 90 seconds. And if you can stay on the arc of that emotion, you will sort of ride it through. It rises, it crests, and then it subsides. What happens usually is we react to the emotion, and thereby we sort of sustain it because we're holding on. We're either caught in aversion or trying to hold on. So an emotion arises from the body, we experience it, then we go into reaction. I'd like to talk a little bit about the reactive patterns, because the more you settle, the more you begin to see how much your life is flavored by these 5 different mind states. So as we begin to see clearly, we begin to see what gets in the way of you and being free. Anything that's not going your way, you will have a reaction. And one of the reactions is aversion, which shows up as anger, judgment, blame, ill will, hatred. I saw a little YouTube clip. I don't even know how it landed in my in-bin, but it was a video of a guy watching the most recent Dallas Cowboys game, and I think they lost in the last few seconds, and he literally tore the inside of his house apart. He just ripped counters out of the wall. He threw chairs. He was back to an unfinished basement by the time he was done. We all get caught in anger at different times. Anger, the blind rage, is a reactive pattern. So that's the grossest expression. But anytime we find ourselves caught in ill will or judgment, there's something there that obscures the actual experience of the moment. These 5 states are known as the hindrances or the obstacles, and they're a very, very powerful thing to see. The second of these states falls into the category of craving or wanting. It's when you find yourself fantasizing, or find yourself planning, or find yourself just sort of lost in sense pleasure. It is a way of disconnecting from what's happening. And again, it's just a natural way that we check out. I noticed for myself when I had a really big project once, whenever it was time to work on it, I would go into a particular fantasy about something. And finally I realized that was just my trigger. It was just my way of like, I really don't want to do this. So boom, and I'm just lost in a thought form. It would happen again and again, and it became a habit. The third category falls under the realm of worry. And worry has to do with restlessness of mind, of anxiety. Anyone find yourself just sort of on the hamster wheel? Nothing's being resolved, but there's sort of this hamster wheel of like running through it again and again and again. The fourth of these obstacles is known as sloth and torpor, which is heaviness, it's density, it's sleepiness, it's sort of like going into a depressive downward spiral. Again, it's a way of sort of checking out. So for our retreat, the first 3 days were just kind of a sloth and torpor fest. And how many of us here found yourself kind of nodding off during the meditation? Oh, nobody whatsoever? Oh, okay, good, yeah. At one point during the retreat, it was like the first day or two, you're really paying your dues, I just look out there and it was just a sea of whiplash meditation, just. There is part of the sleepiness that you may feel which is purely biological. We are an overstimulated culture. We do not get enough rest. So when you have an intention to come into balance and to shift from the cognitive to the experience in the body, what happens for many people is you close your eyes, you're sort of listening and resting in embodied presence, and what the body does, it says, wow, you're actually paying attention. Let me tell you what I really need. And boom, you're out. So it's great feedback. But there's another quality of the sloth and torpor, which has an emotional quality to it too. For some people, when the going gets tough, they take naps. It's sort of a way of going numb, a way of self-protection. The fifth state is doubt and self-criticism. Anyone ever find yourself hijacked by this state here? Yeah. Doubt and self-criticism. So with these 5 mind states, anger, aversion, ill will, judgment, blame, in one category, craving, fantasy, sense pleasure, another category, worry, restlessness, anxiety, sloth and torpor, and doubt and self-criticism, when you are hijacked by any one of these states, they obscure presence. It is impossible to be fully present. So, as I like to say, there's good news and bad news. The good news, there are only 5. And the bad news is they are really pervasive. But again, as you settle, as you naturally become more self-aware, as you begin to see more clearly, you will begin to recognize these states. And once you recognize the state, once you can name it to yourself, you have begun to shift your relationship to it. You've begun to reinforce who you are as the observer of this changing state. And it is a world of difference between being angry and being with your anger, which is really leads to this third piece around seeing transformation and how transformation works. I think many of us, we sort of have, out of those 5 states, we have a natural predilection toward 1 or 2. You know how some people are outrage waiting to happen? You know? And some people are sort of like rejection waiting to happen. We sort of have built-in ways of relating to this world. And the question becomes, how do we work with these states in real time? And what I have found for myself, and again, I make a distinction, I'll just sort of say it again, that in my own practice I have what I call my maintenance meditation, which is a little bit I do every day that sort of helps me to slow down and remember what's most important. And there's another quality of meditation which I think of as transformation meditation, which is the times of intensive practice, either being on retreat or when you're really working with some challenge in your life and you're really wanting to bring non-judging awareness to that particular issue. I used to think for a long time that my goal in meditation was whenever one of these mind states would arise, my goal was to burn through it as fast as I could so I could get back to that good place. After many, many years, I began to realize that these states are the practice. And it's how skillful you can be when you find yourself in a reactive pattern. When you find yourself locked into ill will that you can't shake. Or when you consciously go off into sort of a disassociative fantasy pattern. Or when you realize that you have been working the hamster wheel really, really well, but not getting anywhere. Or if you find yourself getting sort of disassociated, or the depression that comes from disconnecting from life. Or being crippled by doubt. By the ruthless critic that's back there that's never ever letting you feel like you're ever enough. So our natural inclination as biological beings is to move away from pain and move toward pleasure. That's what we do to survive. You know, if you eat the red berries, you know, you notice someone else is eating the red berries, they die, you don't eat the red berries, you know. You keep going. You know, we're the product of a very nervous population, you know, scanning for danger. You know, we have a nervous system. So the question becomes, and part of the Buddha's realization was that we're all looking for happiness, our true nature. But part of his realization was everyone is doing it the wrong way. Everyone is seeking pleasure through the senses. So there's sort of like short-term happiness and long-term happiness. And when we begin to practice self-observation without judgment, when you begin to settle the mind and begin to see all the ways you react to life, and you begin to see that some of those are kind of unskillful patterns or looking for new possibilities, then you have the presence to actually turn toward the discomfort, to actually turn toward what is presenting itself. And that is the transformative journey, to recognize what is here, to recognize what is arising. And this stage of recognizing or realizing what's happening is enormously powerful. When you can name what's going on, there can be quite a shift. I remember, this was, boy, a long, long time ago. I lived in a spiritual community. I had an arranged marriage. Wonderful person. Just not someone that I felt I should be married to. But I worked very, very hard for many, many years to try and make it work. And I noticed I was just so out of sorts, so really unhappy. I remember at one point, I just sort of, in my meditation, I just stopped. I said, so what's really going on? And there was just this little voice that said, your marriage is over. And as soon as I recognized it, as soon as I could name it, a shift began. And a very wholesome shift. So this step of realizing or recognizing what's presenting, in the shamanic traditions, as I always say, they say that when you can name a fear, you take its power away. Or you begin to take its power away just by naming it. So the second step, when you are presented with a difficult state, and you can name it, is you can ask yourself, can I be with this? Can I allow this state to be here? And this is a very, very important question, because sometimes what comes up in the practice of meditation, if you really have an intention to be free, old undigested memories will arise. Sometimes there can be some trauma associated to them. It can literally feel like it's too much. In that case, I suggest you let it know that you see it. And another time, when the conditions are different, you might be able to be with it. There are a number of factors that go into awakening. You have to have a certain degree of concentration or presence. You have to have a certain degree of non-judging awareness. You have to have some curiosity. You have to have access to relaxation. And you have to have energy to really inquire deeply. If those factors aren't there, the conditions aren't right. So stepping away is a very wise and skillful thing. But if you do sort of recognize and it feels like you can be with it, the third step is to actually investigate it, to really be intimate with it. As the classic teaching is that you have tea with your demon. And the primary place that you be with it is if you can identify what it feels like inside, its location. If you're experiencing anger, aversion, ill will, you will find how your nervous system holds that state. If your mind is lost in fantasy and planning, and you really pay attention to it, if you be intimate with it, you will find a certain way that your body holds that experience. Worry, restlessness, you'll find it. Sloth and torpor, you can't miss it. Doubt and criticism, it'll have another quality that you'll be able to recognize inside. When you are able to really move closer to that experience, There are a number of questions you can ask yourself. The one that I find so helpful, just for me, is to sort of ask that experience, that feeling inside, how do you want me to be with you right now? That's a very powerful question. And if you hang out with it, you'll perhaps get a sense. You'll come more intimately in touch with what is there. One of the interesting elements of anicca, this quality of impermanence, is that when we remember it, it can be quite helpful. In my talk, I told a story. I'll give you the brief one. I've told it here before. But it's a story of someone who is told to find a ring. And the ring is supposed to be able to make a happy person sad and a sad person happy. And he travels and travels and travels, and finally an old jeweler, he asked him, do you know what this ring is? And he goes to the back of a shop and he inscribes these words, and the words say, this too shall pass. So when you find yourself in any of these states, these can be very deep entrenched states, when you can turn your attention toward it, to be intimate with it, to investigate it, it can be helpful to remember, this will change, this will pass. And you can begin to see how, if you can be with it, that there is something in there for you to experience, simply to be with it. Oftentimes, when you can really be with a strong state, it will shift in some way. And primarily it shifts to being seen, to recognizing it. And perhaps the most important quality is to bring a quality of kindness, of compassion. When you can draw on a sense of loving presence or empathy and offer that to what it feels like inside, that is the lubrication that can allow it to shift. In this acronym of RAIN, to recognize or realize, to allow or accept, to investigate or to be intimate with it, the end part of this equation is a sense of non-identification, a sense of just the capacity to let it be. So I'd like to lead a little reflection. You might sort of try and noodle around with this process for a few minutes. If you like, you can close your eyes. And you might bring into mind just something that happened today or earlier this week that was maybe a little challenging or troubling. You might sort of just select something that's not too traumatic, but something you might investigate. It could be a relationship, it could be a challenge at work. Take a few moments to go through the files and sense if you can find something to investigate. And if you can't think of anything, you could make something up. So take a moment and sense if you can just reflect on this particular issue. Can you have a visual sense of it? Maybe creating like a static image or a little video clip? Is there any auditory memory about this particular issue? Any sounds or tone of voice or words? And when you turn your attention to the kinesthetic, what does it feel like inside as you reflect on this issue? Can you locate that? exploring this quality of recognition or realization. Is there a predominant emotion that you have about this? Does it feel okay to be with this for a few more minutes? If no, you might turn your attention elsewhere. If yes, you might sort of open to investigate it. As you reflect on this situation, what is it like at its most chronic, at its worst, if you were to exaggerate the feeling? You might explore offering it some empathy or compassion and notice how it might move or shift or change. Is there a sense of how this wants you to be with it right now? Is there a sense of what this needs in order to feel more whole? And regarding this situation, what advice do you have to give yourself? And then gently deepening the breath. Letting your eyes open if you like, or you can remain with them closed. So that was just kind of a brief inquiry into this practice of recognizing what is here, sensing what it's like to allow it, and then moving deeper into investigation and inquiry into what it has to teach, what it has to offer you. So with our mind, we can incline the mind in different ways. When you experience these states of aversion, craving, worry, sloth and torpor, we can stream energy toward that, and we find ourselves more and more caught in those states. Or we can also practice non-judging awareness. Look for how we can shift our relationship to it. And we can also begin to incline the mind towards seeing the good. I wanted to share this story with you, which I had heard on retreat. Julio Diaz has a daily routine. Every night, the 31-year-old social worker ends his hour-long subway commute to the Bronx one stop early just so he can eat at his favorite diner. But one night last month, as Diaz stepped off the number 6 train and onto a nearly empty platform, his evening took an unexpected turn. He was walking toward the stairs when a teenage boy approached and pulled out a knife. He wants my money, so I just give him my wallet and told him, "Here you go," Diaz says. As the teen began to walk away, Diaz told him, "Hey, wait a minute, you forgot something. If you're going to be robbing people for the rest of the night, you might as well take my coat to keep you warm." The would-be robber looked at his would-be victim like, "What's going on here?" Diaz says. He asked me, "Why are you doing this?" Diaz replied, "If you're willing to risk your freedom for a few dollars, then I guess you must really need the money. I mean, all I wanted to do was get dinner, and if you really want to join me, you're more than welcome." You know, I just felt maybe he needs help, Diaz says. Diaz says he and the teen went into the diner and sat in a booth. The manager comes by, the dishwashers come by, the waiters come by to say hi, Diaz says. The kid was like, you know everybody here, do you own this place? No, I just eat here a lot, Diaz says, he told the teen. He says, but you're even nice to the dishwasher. Diaz replied, well, haven't you been taught you should be nice to everybody? Yeah, but I didn't think people actually behaved that way, the teen said. Diaz asked him what he wanted out of life. He just had almost a sad face, Diaz says. The teen couldn't answer Diaz, or maybe he didn't want to. When the bill arrived, Diaz told the teen, look, I guess you're going to have to pay for this bill because you have all my money and I can't pay for this. So if you give me my wallet back, I'll gladly treat you. The teen didn't even think about it and returned the wallet. Diaz says, I gave him $20. I figure maybe it'll help him. I don't know. And Diaz says he asked for something in return, the teen's knife, and he gave it to me. Afterward, when Diaz told his mother what had happened, she said, you're the type of kid that if someone asks you for the time, you give them your watch. I figure, you know, if you treat people right, you can only hope they treat you right. It's as simple as it gets in this complicated world. I love that story because it is such a response of looking for the good. I thought we might close with a short meditation on this reflection. You might take a moment to feel the breath again, draw your attention back to the here and now. And you might, if you like, bring into mind someone in your life who may be struggling or suffering. And just take a moment to sort of recognize what they're going through. You might imagine what they're feeling inside. And you might, in your own way, wish them well. Wish them a sense of happiness. A sense of peace. May this person feel safe from inner and outer harm. May this person be free from suffering. In these final moments, as you breathe, just sensing this capacity of the heart to generate kindness and compassion. Its capacity for joy and steadiness. And you might offer these qualities to yourself. Quality of happiness, of inner peace, safety, freedom. And offering this out in all directions to the person behind you, to either side. May these beings be free, happy, at peace. Imagine this radiating out in all directions to all beings. including yourself, this breath. And as you're ready, gently deepening the breath. And when you're ready, letting your eyes open.